Afternoon. This is Josh Haas with the Hawk Migration Association of North America, and we're excited to welcome you, as always, to our monthly Lunch and Learn series. We're super excited to kick off 2023 with our first with J.F. Therrien, and obviously a very popular topic that is owl-based. So hopefully some of you might be noticing the sheer number of folks that we have in the room today, the virtual room that is. And that is in part because of a slight temporary upgrade we've made to allow more folks in. For the longest time, we've only had the ability to have 100 people or less in our Zoom meetings. So we're excited to at least temporarily upgrade that. It does come with a cost, but as you can see, we're approaching 200 people. So that is very, very useful for engaging as a community. So we're excited to offer that. Today is very excited. We're very excited today for this topic in particular, and we thank J.F. Therrien for taking some time out of his day to be with us today. So, just a few housekeeping things. You will notice that you don't have the ability to unmute yourself. That is on purpose. We want you to engage with us using your chat. So, at the bottom of your Zoom window, there should be a button for chat. Go ahead and click that and you can start to engage with us as well as everyone in the virtual meeting today. Let us know where you're coming in from, where you're calling in from, maybe where your closest Hawkwatch is. And also, speaking of chat, make sure to use that chat to ask questions. So we'll try to get to as many of the questions that come in as we can. Julie will be moderating, and she'll take note of all of your questions. And like I said, get to as many as we can. Please understand that we have a lot of people with us today, so there could be more questions than we can actually get to today. So please be patient and keep that in mind. This is being recorded if you haven't noticed, and we're also streaming it live to Facebook. For those that would like to see it again, feel free to go to our Facebook page, and then hopefully in the coming weeks, we'll have it on our website as well at HMANA.org. So having said all that, again, welcome, and I will turn it over to Julie, who is actually going to introduce our speaker for the day. So Julie, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Josh. My name is Julie Brown. I'm the Raptor Migration and Programs Director for HMANA. And thanks for tuning in today, everybody. I'm very excited, and we're excited to welcome JF. We always love to have him speak about his research. I think snowies in particular are of great interest to this audience. It seems to be a species that's very mysterious and alluring. I know I look forward to seeing them most winters here in New Hampshire. So J.F. Therrien grew up in Sherbrooke, Canada, about 30 minutes from the border with Vermont. He has a bachelor's degree in biology from the Université de Sherbrooke and a master's degree in biology at Université Laval, Canada, and a Ph.D. in biology also at Université Laval. He's been the Senior Research Biologist at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary since 2011 and works on various aspects of raptor conservation science, such as satellite tracking of peregrine falcons, turkey vultures, and snowy owls, monitoring American Kestrel breeding populations, and monitoring raptor migration around the globe. So with that, thanks so much, JF. You can take it away.
All right, thank you very much, and well done with the French pronunciation. I appreciate that. As you know, I grew up just north of the border, and I still carry my French accent wherever I go. It's a pleasure for me to be here. It's a pleasure for me, as always, to talk about the research we're doing, the conservation projects we're doing. Today, the talk is going to be about the Arctic raptor, especially snowy owls, but I'll mention as well some work that's being done with rough-legged hawks and other species. As you know, the tundra ecosystem is a simple one, and there's issues with climate change happening, so I'll be mentioning that too later on in the talk. I'll start with maybe an original way to start, but usually I like to start and let me try to and acknowledge all the colleagues that were instrumental in doing this work. none of this, the research I'm going to be presenting today is possible to do alone. I'm very grateful for an amazing team of people, collaborators from all over the globe. I'm sure this list, I'm forgetting people, so forgive me, whoever I forgot. But there's a lot of different persons, organizations associated with the projects we're doing. There's a lot of things you can do on your own, but there's so much more potential when we're gathering with people, we're collaborating and connecting with other around the globe. So thank to all of them listed here. So Snowy Owl, I've been studying Snowy Owl not because of the Harry Potter movie. I'm glad and grateful for the Harry Potter movie to bring Snowy Owl this even greater charisma and charm. But we're studying snowy owls and rough-legged hawks, gyrfalcons, and peregrine falcon to better understand one of the ecosystems that I love to study, that I want to protect, which is the Arctic tundra. In the Arctic tundra, those 4 raptors are major in what they do in their predation pressure, and their ecosystem, their ecological role is very, very important. Just as a comparison or context, those guys are just the northern cousins of the species you know well, the great horned owl, the red-tailed hawk, and the subspecies of peregrine that we have at our latitude. So basically, we're studying the northern cousins. This is me out in the field where I'm lucky to be part of a bigger project, which is called the Ecological Studies and Environmental Monitoring at Bylot Island. It's a national park up in northern Canada. And again, like I said, there's a whole team of people studying the whole ecosystem, from the plants to the lemmings who eat the plants, the geese, the foxes, the other, the shorebirds, glaciers, lakes, and all of that. So put it all together, we have a thorough understanding of the ecosystem, which is for today, this is critical to understand how we're going to be protecting those species. Obviously, we're looking at it as an ecosystem perspective. I'm the raptor specialist, but we have a lot of partners and collaborators to work with us. So where is that place that we're working on? Here, there's a map of North America, and highlighted in blue is the tundra ecosystem, very roughly pictured on this graph. So northern Canada and the northern tier of Alaska has tundra. Our long-term study site is on Bylot Island. It's a long way up north. I like to mention to people that when we go in the summertime, we get 24-hour daylight. It's so up north that the sun never set in the summertime. And this is where, I mean, it's a nice playground. This is where we monitor those snowy owls' nests, where they usually are on top of the hills overlooking the valleys. And it's a gorgeous place to work. I like to quote one of the famous Canadian author to say that to go to the Arctic, you get that disease. It's a sort of a disease. It's a disease of imagination. It has no effect on your body, but it lives in your mind, and you always want to go back. So if you haven't read Farley Mowat, put that on your list. It's an amazing book and a great author. So as I said, we are working with a lot of people across the Arctic. We're lucky to have people on the ground at several sites that we're working with. All of that allow us to get a feel of what's going on the global scale, on the global range. So what the situation is on Bylot might be way different than what they're seeing in Herschel Island one year. But putting it all together, we are able to assess what is going on in the Arctic on a bigger picture. So one thing that we did in my role while I was a PhD student a few years ago, we set up to measure that predation pressure. We came up with the hypothesis, according to the literature, that raptors have a huge impact in their ecosystem. And the fact that we could measure it on Bylot allow us to assess how important are raptors for the ecosystem. So as you know, in the tundra, we have those high variation in abundance of lemmings. The lemmings are those small mammals. They look like a mouse or a vole. and they're adapted to the cold, and they show huge fluctuation of abundance. Some years you have a lot of them, and some years you have very, very few. Now, we're monitoring this over time and see that snowy owl, well, they're actually coming and nesting whenever there's a lot of lemmings. So by knowing that, we suspect the snowy owl could be dampening those fluctuations. They could be keeping lemming population to not overgrow and overbrowse their own habitat. So we measure how many nests per square kilometer there are. We measure the predation rate. So you see on this time-lapse picture, that's a male coming back to the nest. It's delivering a lemming to a female. She's gonna feed the chicks. You see a big gray chick. I don't know if you can see my mouse. There's a big chick here. So I'll play that short slideshow of pictures again. You see that chick, hungry chick, the female's here, male's coming back with a lemming. So we measured on a daily basis how many lemmings are brought back to the nest, and we know how many nests there are per square kilometer. So we know in a given year how much predation is imposed on the lemming population. And snowy owls are pretty efficient at it. So that's a picture of a snowy owl's nest a few years ago that we noticed that the male was very efficient at bringing back lemmings. We counted 78 lemmings around that nest. And it's easy to say that all those eggs, well, there's 3 eggs and 1 chick, but when they hatch, they're going to have plenty of food to feed on, and they are likely to be successful. So we measure how many chicks are surviving until fledgling. We're measuring them, their growth rate, and we're keeping track until they leave the site in the fall. So usually late August, September through October, they'll start to disperse and vacate the area after they did that predation pressure. So one of the questions we had was, where do they go next? Where do they go next year? Because on consecutive year, it's very rare that you have breeding snowy owls on a given site. They usually come and nest in huge numbers in 1 year, but then 3 years in between before you get another peak of abundance, another year with breeding snowy owls. So the main question we had was, where do they go? What do they do? Are they going elsewhere in the tundra to do that predation pressure where lemming numbers are high? And that's exactly what we found. I like to show this map. This is 12 tracked females. They were all tracked. They were all neighbors on Violet Island, right under my mouse, on 1 year. So they were all neighbors, those 12 females. There were more than them, but we had 12 transmitters to deploy. And then at the end of that summer, they disperse. Some of them stay very near their breeding ground, the yellow track here. The red, look at the red one, going all the way down to South Dakota before coming back and breed the next year, way ahead, way apart, way far away from their breeding site from the previous year. I like to show that picture because compared to most bird species that have strict straight line migration behavior, the snowy owl they don't do this. I like to compare that with a bowl of spaghettis. All those lines are crisscrossing, they're going in every direction, the snowy owls are actually looking for a place to settle, a place where there's a lot of lemmings. What we saw over 4 consecutive years, we tracked those birds for 4 years. Only one of them, those 12 female, actually came back to breed on Violet on the 4th year. But between those years, it went to breed on Greenland, went to breed on Ellesmere twice, and then to Violet. And then the same for the other ones. They bred on way apart sites before they actually ended up large distance between those nesting attempts. The numbers here, the average of 700 kilometers of annual dispersal is the longest ever recorded on any bird species. So it's pretty phenomenal how much they move from one year to another. The same pattern has been seen in the Western North American Arctic. And one thing that's worth mentioning that I like to see and think about is the site fidelity. You see snowy owls not showing much site fidelity, but there's even more site fidelity in the wintering ground than in the summer ground. So that's pretty phenomenal for any bird species. It's very uncommon to have a species that is more faithful between years to its wintering ground than the breeding ground. And that's because lemming abundance doesn't occur. It's not stable through time. One year you got a lot of lemmings, and then the next year you have very few. So the snowy owl, they need to move from one year to from one place to the next. So I like to compare it with the southern cousin, the great horned owl. So they have those range of occurrence that are pretty much, there's not much overlap. So whenever the boreal forest and the tree line is where the snowy owl, north of it is the snowy owl realm, and then south of it is where great horned owl occur. When you look at their diet, so great horned owl in the breeding time, they have a wide variety. They're a diet generalist. They can feed on a wide variety of prey, and they can breed, and they have, if one of those sprays is more abundant one year, they're going to focus on it. They're going to switch next year if there's more of one of the other. In comparison, the snowy owl feeds almost exclusively during the summertime on lemming. So 95-96% of its diet is made of lemming. This is what allows snowy owls to breed. So the fact that it is dependent, it's specialist on those lemmings, makes it it needs to be mobile in across the tundra, because those lemmings vary tremendously from one year to the next. So you see a breeding dispersal. This is the same slideshow or the same picture that I showed before. If you put some great horned owls, those are fiction. I didn't put transmitters, but basically they stay in territory all their life. Once they establish a place as adults and they breed, they tend to be faithful to that site. Compare it to the snowy owl, which is way different. And again, clutch size. So great horned owls have, every year they lay between 1 and 3 eggs, most of the time 2. They raise 1 or 2 chicks, 2 fledgling. Snowy owl, well, they move a lot, and then you can have clutches of 2, you can have clutches of 11 eggs. So when they have found a good spot where there's a lot of lemmings and they're in good body condition, they lay those large clutches and they can feed all those chicks. It can be very successful. When there's that many lemming, you can have those kind of pictures, all those chicks reaching fledgling age, and that creates those winter eruptions that we see in the south. If you look at the other species that I like to compare, rough-legged and red-tailed, it's pretty much the same story. Northern cousin, southern cousin, clutch size of red-tail between 1 and 5, usually 2, sometimes 3. Rough-legged 2 to 7. Sometimes when they have the side, they pick the right side, they're going to raise 7 chicks, and all of them going to be reaching fledgling. So again, when we track those movements, those transmitters, we had questions that we want to see where they disperse to. But in between those years, we found phenomenal behavior. We found that most of the snowy owls in the eastern Canadian Arctic actually don't winter down at our latitude. We thought they were all coming down to southern Canada or northern US. Well, most of the adults, they don't do this. They stay up in the Arctic. They actually go out and they are off the coast. They're out at sea during an extended period of time in the wintertime. So that raised a lot of questions saying, well, what are they doing out at sea? They're supposed to be small mammals specialists eating lemmings, and there are 200 kilometers off the coast for extended period of time. So when we first saw those tracks, we were wondering what they were doing over there. And we found out that they can actually benefit from that habitat, that ecosystem. And we saw that they use those open water patches that are created on the sea ice because of tidal currents, because of wind, because of geography. You have those openings in the ice, and those openings are actually the place where, well, there's no lemming. It's not a swimming pool for lemming, but it's a swimming pool for wintering seabirds. Eider ducks, long-tailed ducks, gulls are all using those open water patches. The eiders, for example, and long-tailed ducks, they'll dive and go and prey on mussels on the seafloor, and they'll rest on the ice. And the more we talked about this with Inuits up in northern Canada and biologists from Wildlife Service in Canada. They say, yeah, we see snowy owl. They're blending with the ecosystem. They're white over a white patch of ice, and they're preying on eiders and long-tailed ducks. So that's a strategy they do. So we were pretty fascinated by this behavior and wondered, I mean, because an eider duck is a big duck. It's heavier than a snowy owl. So we were wondering, do they have the capacity to actually grab an eider duck and kill it and feed it and feed on it? And they actually do. So those guys say, yeah, they do. And when we start measuring those size of claws, we had people sending us picture. That's actually a picture taken on the Great Lakes. So at temperate latitudes, it's a young snowy owl, young of the year, was flying away with a half-eaten merganser. So they can't do that, even though mergansers, eiders are big prey for snowy owls. So just a side note, we had that question in mind to say, how on earth can they actually kill prey that are bigger than them and actually be efficient at it? So we start looking at their talon morphology, the digit, the length of the digit, like their fingers, and the talon themselves. How big are they? Are curved? Are they? Are long? Are they? And then we compare it. When you look at this picture, you don't want to be a lemming, obviously, facing this, or you don't want to be a duck, as a matter of fact. So we went out and compared it with owl species. We're lucky to have access to the specimens at Smithsonian Natural History Museum. So we put into context the snowy owl, comparing it with 15 species of owls from around the world, looking at their diet and looking at the shape of their talon and feet. What we found, we took precise measurements. We measured the curvature. We use a software that can allow it to assess the robustness. So how thick is the talon, how long it is, and all those levers to assess how much can they do with the tools they have, their weaponry. So we looked at and compare the speed, the strength, the reach, the curvature, and the robustness of all those owl species. So I'll skip on the details because the next graph can be a little intimidating to look at. But basically, we were able to group owl species according to their talons. So we saw that the big fish owls here on top have super robust talons. The small mammal specialists, they have talons that are made for reach and being fast, but they're not as powerful as the fish owls or the generalists. On the other hand, the insects specialists are very long, not curved talons, but super agile feet. One thing that you notice, look at here, Bubos candiacus. This is snowy owl. It's way out there for the curvature. So the curvature allows an owl or a raptor to actually see something and not let go, and it can just stay on top of it. It doesn't need to fly with it right away. It's not a grab and go thing. It's basically a grab and sit and kill on the spot. So that's what they do. If you look at this picture, so fish specialists, insect specialists, small mammal specialists, generalists, and then look at this guy. Seasonal small mammal specialist. That's what we would call a snowy owl. It kind of falls out of every other category because of the curvature and the robustness of it. So it allows snowy owls to prey very efficiently on lemmings, but they don't need that much of a curvature for lemmings. If it would be only a lemming specialist, a small mammal specialist, it would be here in the middle with the other gray owls and barred owls. Here we have this amazing curvature that allows snowy owl to kind of seize a big duck and sit on it until it can feed on it. So pretty fascinating and interesting thing to study the ecology and evolution to assess, for example, rare, understudied, or extinct species. All those measurements we can compare and get a better understanding of their ecology. So back at the Arctic, I'm enjoying working in the Arctic because of the diversity of raptors. It's a very fascinating ecosystem. When we put it all together, like I said, I'm the one guy studying the raptors up on Biolab, but the colleagues and I, we're putting it all together. Look at this supposedly very simple ecosystem. So this is the Arctic tundra. Most of those, all the species are here, the vertebrates, the predators on top, the secondary consumer, and then the primary producer, the plants, mosses, the shrubs, and all at the bottom. All of these arrows point to ecological relationship, and all the thicker the arrow means a stronger relationship. So you see snowy owl having a strong arrow on lemmings. They have a small one on ptarmigan and hare. You see the rough-legged hawk here too, but again, a strong relationship with the lemmings. So when you look at this ecosystem that's supposed to be simple, well, it's not that simple. There's all those arrows pointing in all different directions, many of which targeting the lemmings as a key focal point in the whole ecosystem. So one of the questions we have now, and we're very interested and concerned, are the effect of climate change. Obviously, climate change is a phenomenon that's happening. It's happening fast up in the Arctic tundra. It has a power to disrupt many of those lines by just changing one thing. You're changing the whole balance of all those arrows and all those relationships. So we're very concerned, but interested in knowing how the climate change is affecting those relationships. We know that climate change has the effect of the potential to affect several aspects. But the thing that is challenging with climate change is that it is broad, it's holistic, it is complex, and it has a lot of relationships through the food web. So it's not just like snowy owl will die if the temperature rise by 1 degree. It's actually changing the composition of the habitat. It's changing the species inhabiting this habitat, and then it trickles down the food web. So it's not as simple as 1 + 1. You have a lot of covariates to assess. One of the things we see is one of the habitat that they use the most in the wintertime, the sea ice, is retreating big time right now. So we have less and less sea ice every year as we speak. How is that going to affect the way they can prey on ducks in open water patches? We still don't know, but we're very interested in assessing this. The fluctuation in lemmings that we see, they are affected by climate change. When you raise the temperature by just a few degrees, you increase the moisture up in the Arctic, and it creates, instead of those thick snow blanket, you have those ice crusts that are very bad for lemming because they're not as insulating. And so we see, the strong relationship with snowy owl. What we see, and people have seen in Scandinavia, a fading out of lemming fluctuation. So you see less and less of those high peaks of abundance that are so critical for snowy owls to reproduce. Obviously, during several years, this is from Norway, they didn't have any snowy owls nesting because there was not enough lemmings on the sites. So they were very concerned, rightfully so, and are still measuring lemming abundance. Lemming abundance peaked back, I think the last time was 2014, and they had snowy owls, so they were very happy, but they're very concerned because if those cycles or fluctuations start to fade, that means trouble for snowy owls. Another thing we're seeing is, for example, on rough-legged hawks, we see the very structure where they're putting their nests on collapsing with climate change. The permafrost is melting. So if a nest is on a cliff like this, and the underside of the cliff actually collapsed because of the temperatures are warmer, we see complete collapse and failure of rough-legged hawks' nests up in the Arctic. That's happening more and more every year. Another example is on Peregrine Falcon. We see a lot more rainstorms up in the Arctic. So that's a picture taken from colleagues in Rankin Inlet. They set up a motion-triggered camera in front of a peregrine's nest, and they noticed that The adults are fine, even if it rains, they can't sustain the rain, but this poor female is trying to incubate 2 eggs that are floating in a puddle of rainwater. So that's a total failure for those nests. And those rainstorms are happening more and more every year because you increase temperature by just a few degrees and you get that moisture coming up to the Arctic. Another pretty cruel way to go, it's again, same site in Rincon Inlet. People with the motion triggered cameras, they notice here you have the 4 panels are taking 6 hours apart. You have a nice clutch of 4 peregrine chicks that are as healthy as you can think on a very still day up in the Arctic, which is now we have warmer days. And then you see that it's so warm that the chicks are attacked by black flies, and they actually bled to death in a matter of 16 hours by black flies. Just because you increase temperature a little bit, you increase the amount of black flies, and you increase the time that they can actually be active and preying on raptors that haven't evolved to fend those out. Of course, the adults are fine at flying around, but the chicks on the ground are very vulnerable. And we see the same. This is a picture from colleagues in Norway. They picked up this poor female on her nest. She was not able to move. She couldn't see a thing. Her eyelids were clogged with black fly bites. And they brought the female to rehab. They were able to save the female, but the clutch was lost, obviously, because the female was gone. So pretty nasty stuff happening with climate change. And I don't want to focus on the bad stuff because I'm a positive person. I think we have a way to address this. We can change the trend that's going on. I think the future is promising. We have an army of people, starting with grad students. This is Therrien from Slovenia. She's a former trainee with us. She went out to do her Ph.D. studying rough-legged in, her Ph.D. was in Max Planck, Germany, but she was working up in the Arctic in Eurasia. We have people, I was lucky to be invited to talk to Argentinian students recently about raptor conservation. And you see the people interested in acting and doing things. And again, a picture here, World Owl Conference, see the attendance of these conferences, people very interested to assess and to know more about the species. And everyone here on the call is obviously very important because we are taking pride in conserving our species. So I want to thank everyone to join. I want to suggest people share the message. We need to be, to know more about our species. We need to protect them. And another example, again, so Project Snowstorm, we've been studying the Arctic, the winter ecology of snowy owls, totally funded by people like you, people just going on the website, donating $10 and helping us to conduct all those projects over time. I like to end saying, well, those guys are very photogenic. How much do we value those species? How much do we value this ecosystem? And we have the way, I think we have the power, the knowledge to preserve those species, but we need to act. So I'm going to just open it up for question. If you have any question, that would be the time.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, JF. That was amazing. Your photographs are wonderful. And I like that you kind of ending on a happy note and you're hopeful. I'm also optimistic. And just even people tuning in, like you said, and learning more and educating themselves about these species and the conservation risks, it goes a long way. We do have a few questions. I can jump in and start a few off. If you have more, please feel free to add them to the chat. Our first one, Drew is asking he's tuning in from Ontario. And he said, unlike the last 2 winters, he's seen very few snowies. So he's wondering if fewer have come south this winter.
Very good question. Because of the network of people we have up in the Arctic, every September or October, I go out on a limb and make a prediction about winter eruption. Usually we see big eruption following great reproduction conditions. So when there's a lot of lemmings, you have a lot of chicks produced. Lots of them are going to survive until fledgling, and they're going to disperse in the fall. Now, last summer, like I said, I was hoping to go up in the Arctic, but there were so few lemmings and snowy owls breeding in the eastern part of the Canadian Arctic that I didn't go at all. And I predicted a very low eruption, which is a natural phenomenon. We're hoping that this low year will be followed by a high year, but this winter, the quasi absence of snowy owl is because there was very low reproduction across North American tundra.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Let me move along. A couple different people have asked about this bird that showed up in California. Can you comment on the snowy owl that was recently hanging out in Southern California? Why do you suppose it found its way that far from its normal range?
That's a good question. We have, almost every winter, being a high eruption or not, we have birds that are wandering somewhere that we're puzzled and wondering about. That's not uncommon. On years with huge eruption, when there's a lot of birds dispersing, those behavior are even more common. So we see, as I showed on the picture, the snowy owls, they're not following a direct path. They're not going to point A to point B. They're going to everywhere in between. Wherever there's food, they can go to. Now, the one that ended up in California itself, this very one, I don't know the exact path for this bird to get there. We know, though, that those birds, snowy owls, can actually come down south, just south of the boreal forest, and sometimes they'll end up on a ship, on one of the ship, the container ship. They're going to feed on pigeons, and that's how 2 years ago or last winter, there were 3 birds seen in Spain. Northern Spain is not a place for a snowy owl. It's not a common place for a snowy owl, but they had 3 snowy owls happening in northern Spain during the winter. Most likely, actually hitchhiked on boats, on container ships, and feeding on pigeons along the way, and then ended up in Europe. Now, the one in California might be the same if a ship came from Seattle or Vancouver. That's a possible way, or it could have just flown there, but it seems a little far away for a snowy. So maybe people have more information on that very bird, but that's one hypothesis.
Okay, great, thanks. Paul was wondering, your slide where you had all the interconnected relationships between species, he said glaucous gulls are relying heavily on snow geese. How do they kill them? And then others said maybe that's referring to them preying on the eggs.
Eggs and goslings. That's when the glaucous gull, they seldom get the adult geese, but they will feed heavily on the goslings. They're very efficient at it.
Okay, all right. And Peter's asking, do snowies have the sound muffling that other owls have? Do they have good night vision? Even though they're often hunting mostly during the day?
So yeah, in the summertime in the Arctic, it's 24-hour daylight. So they hunt during daylight hours, but they can be very efficient during dark hours too. We see them, for one thing, spending the winter up in the Arctic, which is 24-hour darkness, and they're surviving quite well. We see them here with Project Snowstorm. We were able to track birds to have very precise location data, both during the day and during the night, and we see that at dawn, at dusk, it's when they start being super bouncy, starting to move around and hunting during the night to get that edge over their prey. So they can do both. They have a very silent flight, as most owls do, and they have an amazing vision. I've seen them from a blind looking at snowy, and you see the snowy is fixing something, start to fly, actually never change course, pick something, a lemming in this case, and then I measured a distance between where it was perched and where it ended up picking that lemmings, and 200 meters. I cannot see clearly 200 meters, a lemming that size and feed on it. And the Snowy was just looking at it and then go and then never change its course. So they're amazing vision for sure.
That's incredible. Yeah. Okay, a few more questions. We do have some time, so I'll keep going if that's okay with you. Linda is wondering, is there a correlation between depth of snowpack and lemming population?
Absolutely, you're right on. People studying the lemmings up in the Arctic, they notice that when there's a thick blanket of snow, that's the best conditions for lemmings. When that happens, usually you have an increase, an uptick in lemming population. And if all the conditions are good, so if there was good production of plants the previous year, low predation, and a thick blanket of snow, you're going to have a nice peak of abundance in lemmings.
Okay. Bruce is wondering, any indication of survival rate of erupting snowy owls that migrate further south and not where lemmings are?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So some of the work from our Ph.D. student, Rebecca McCabe, she compares survival rate of adults and young south of the range, so when they're erupting. And we see that adults are pretty good at surviving. They have a similar survival rate as between them, adults a high value. The young ones are the one facing or more vulnerable. They are they need a fend for themselves. They need to feed themselves. They need to defend a territory. They need to learn quickly how to do this, how to interact in a human-dominated landscape. And oftentimes they ended up, the big majority of birds sent out to rehab centers and found dead with vehicle strikes. It's the young ones that are actually falling down.
Yeah, okay. And next question is from Dawn. She says, can you speak to rough-legged hawk migration? We see them here in Wyoming. Are they following a more direct path from as far?
Yes. So I don't want to steal thunder from a PhD student of ours that maybe you should invite for one of those talks, Neil Paprocki.
Yeah.
He's working hard movement patterns of rough-legged hawk. They've been deploying, I'm happy to be partnering with them, but deploying several transmitters on rough-legged hawks. We see that their migrating path is a lot more stable or constant over time than the snowies. Snowies is just the extreme of going anywhere at any time. But rough-legged will have those straight lines to go down south, but when they come to the Arctic, they'll start to move around it as well. They're looking for a place. They're not necessarily faithful to their site. There will be a little more than the snowy, but compared to a peregrine, and I have a peregrine here on the screen, Peregrine Falcon are fascinating in their clockwork migration. They leave, the trigger for their migration is most likely the day length. So as soon as it reaches a point where the day length is retreating, recessing, and then they will be leaving year after year on the 17th of September. They're leaving the Arctic breeding ground. That one individual is leaving on the same date. It's arriving down south in Chile for the winter on the same 21 of November every year, almost every year. And you see that regularity in peregrines. So the rough-legged is in between. You see those movement back and forth, but then there's a little bit of exploration too. Not as extreme as a snowy, but in between.
Okay. And that's a good tip. We should get Neil back here for a lunch and learn to talk about some rough leg migration. I think he's spoken at our conferences, but I don't think he's done a lunch and learn, so I'll make a note of that. Elliot is asking, does weather possibly delay their southward movement? Here in Rudyard, Michigan, we had a slow start with just a few birds in December, but the last 2 weeks we have seen a large influx with dozens of birds now in the area. Last weekend I was in Rudyard and there were many birds, all very active and moving around, 5 in flight at once. Was this possibly a weather-related delay to their southward movement, or something else?
No, yeah, absolutely right. Snowy owls, like I said, they're not on a fixed schedule. They will react and respond to the conditions, the current condition. If it gets super cold or very snowy and they have trouble accessing their prey on the ground, they'll move south. They'll react to that. They'll go where the food is. They're driven by the stomach for most part.
Okay. Stephen has a question about lemmings. That slide you showed always gets me. That blows my mind. That's 78 lemmings in one photo. Stephen's asking, in North America, in the tundra, can you have different lemming populations in different areas of the Arctic? And do the snowies travel pre-breeding to look for areas of higher population?
This is exactly right. You guys have listened to the time. This is great. You're exactly on the point, on the money. Where we work up in the Eastern Canadian Arctic, we have two species of lemmings, the brown lemming, the colored lemming. The brown lemming is the one showing those huge abundance, huge fluctuation in abundance, reaching 10 to 100-fold their population size on peak years. And in between those years, they have very, very few of them. So the colored lemming is a little more stable in the fluctuation, but it fluctuates as well. I forgot what was the rest of the question, but
let me see. Do the snowies travel pre-breeding?
yeah. So exactly.
To look for
So
areas?
in the spring, you see them not going back to a straight line. They're actually starting to zigzag like crazy. They're going back on their track. They're going everywhere. If you look at where they started, like in February, or once they reach the Arctic tundra, if they've south of the boreal forest, when they come to the tundra, and if you look at where they are and where they end up in May, the straight line could be, I don't know, 250 kilometers, but they actually will patrol 1,000 or more. They're just looking around, zigzagging, prospecting for a place to settle.
Okay. These are such great questions. I'm going to keep going with a few more if you have time. It's about 12:47.
Sure.
Soleil is asking, what do you think accounts for the relatively large clutch size of northern raptors in comparison to their southern counterparts?
Ooh, very good question. So for the tundra, I would say that the adaptation, those birds have adapted to take or benefit from large fluctuation of food availability. Maybe the cost, the energetical cost to produce one more egg or two more eggs is not that much compared to the benefit of being able to raise that many. If you're the southern cousin, even if you lay 6 eggs, well, chances are they're going to be hard to raise to fledgling because food will get short at some point. So you have that boom and bust thing that we like to say, but when you picked it the right place, the right time, you have lemmings that you're tripping on lemmings. They're everywhere. Might as well benefit and cash on it, produce 7 chicks, because it might take a few years before you can do it again. So it's an adaptation and evolution strategy that's been paying off for Arctic species.
Okay.
Good question.
Thanks. Paul is asking, do you see Arctic fox fluctuations mirroring snowy owl population trends?
Yes, the Arctic fox is showing similar long distance movement. Obviously, it never gets out of the tundra ecosystem, so it doesn't come to the boreal forest or temperate zone like the snowies are, but they are showing those wide fluctuation in but denning or how do you say that on mammals, but how when they have a den and with cubs, there's a lot more active dens on years with high lemmings than on years with low lemmings. If the lemmings are very low, the population is very low, the fox will rely on geese and other things they can find, but they have trouble raising their clutches, just like the snowy. So they have very similar behavior.
Okay. All right. Kelly is asking, why don't snowy owls prey on snow geese young in the Arctic? It's always been interesting to me that they are so specialized in their prey selection during breeding, but not as much so in winter. Here in southern Ontario, I've seen them go after small to large. Hold on, just trying to get that. Seen them go after small to large birds, horned larks, snow buntings, rock pigeons, various duck species, and a variety of mammals. Are there any other raptors that have this type of life strategy?
Well, yeah, so the diet, we have all sorts of raptors that have either a very generalist diet or a very specialized diet. The snowy is particular because it can switch from a very specific specialist diet of lemmings during the breeding time to a very generalist one in the wintertime. I've seen snowy owls preying on snow geese and goslings, but for some reason, all they can see in the summertime are the lemmings. The lemmings are easy to catch for a snowy. They're just like strawberries for them, I guess. They're just picking them up. There's not a big adults trying to protect them. So the goslings are protected by their parents. But I've seen snowy owl taking a few of them. Having said that, it's not common. We see the reverse phenomenon, which is fascinating. When you have a snowy owl nest, it's not uncommon to have 30, 50, 100 snow geese nests right next to it because it's benefiting from the protection of the snowy owl. It's fending off the Arctic foxes away and the glaucous gulls and the Jaegers, and it's not preying much on the goslings. So if at the end snow geese will lose one of their 5 goslings to the snowy, it's a beneficial strategy compared to having it all done by a fox or a gull. So you see those pocket of nesting geese in odd places, and whenever we see that, we know there's going to be a snowy owl right in the middle of that group.
That's so interesting. Wow. So it's worth losing a chick here or there for the protection.
Strategy again, you're trying to produce as many as you can, and it's just so interesting to see when you think you know this whole ecosystem, it's easy to understand there's just a few species, but all those interaction between them, it makes it fascinating. You see that we're trying to put it in boxes. Oh, the snowy owl, this is what they do, and then the geese, this is what they do. But then it turns out there's all those intricate combination. Snowy owl going out at sea in the wintertime, preying on the marine ecosystem during a whole, after their year, they're marine predators. So it's very, very special or fascinating to see.
It sure is. Wow. Okay, I think I will ask just a couple more questions and then we'll probably wrap up. Kelly is wondering, with the tracking studies, are you seeing that snowy owls that are young erupt south during winter and then stay north once they grow older, or is there enough data?
Part of it is we would like to add some data, but what we see is some of those birds will switch strategy. Sometimes a bird will come down south and then stop coming down south and stay up north, but we've seen the reverse too. Birds spending the winter up in the Arctic, and then all of a sudden the next winter comes down south. So it goes both ways, and it's hard for us to assess precisely what is creating this switch. Obviously, the birds we have noticed the switch, they've survived both years. Have they survived or had a better condition, or they're trying to change their fate? I don't know. So we still have a lot to go. Like I said, there's still plenty of questions. If there's anyone interested on the call to talk about projects, obviously I'm always happy to talk with potential grad students or trainees with us at Hawk Mountain.
Okay, great. As one last question, I would say, this one is from Barbara. She says, any difference in hunting tactics between lemming hunting and mice or vole hunting when they come south?
No, that's pretty much the same. So it's a sit and wait strategy. Snowy will find a perch with a good view and a clear path to go to those places. They'll look for signs of small mammals. They'll look for mostly movement, and then you see their gaze starting to be fixed, and you know something's going to happen. Sometimes it doesn't happen, but when they see that, they focus on it, and then they go down. So it's very similar between a lemming and any other small mammal.
Okay. Are you okay with if I add your email address to the chat, JF, if people
Yeah,
want to
absolutely.
follow
I
up
have
with
it
any
on
future
the
questions?
I have it on the next slide too. And this is way off topic, but and then another speaker that could actually probably come here and talk during lunch and learn would be from a different region of the globe, but Pablo from Costa Rica. Other projects we have at HMANA, we have a project that's trying to monitor the migration over the corridor from the high Arctic to the tropics to South America and back. So we have collaboration with Kikoldi, among other sites. That's a wonderful place to study birds and to go and visit. That's in Costa Rica. They're looking for volunteers all the time. If you're interested, there's the website. And as help and trying to support the count site, we're organizing birding trips down there. So if anyone's interested in witnessing those large numbers of birds passing through the site, feel free to contact me. We have a birding trip to Costa Rica that we're trying to put together. So feel free to reach out. And lastly, so I'll switch to the next slide because this is what's coming up for HMANA.
Okay, thank you so much, JF. That was so fascinating. We loved it. Speaking to Costa Rica, we will definitely try to get Pablo for a future lunch and learn. I speak very highly of Kikoldi, having spent a couple seasons counting down there. It's a special place. So whether you could get there, volunteering or on a tour with Hawk Mountain or HMANA, you should put it on one of your lists, your life list. So with that, I will hand things back over to Josh, who's going to talk about next month's Lunch and Learn.
Yeah, thank you, Julie, and especially thank you, JF. It was a wonderful presentation. Just want to point out we had 230 people engaged today and online to experience the presentation with JF. So we thank you for that participation and really great questions. This is the part where I'm excited to share next month. So next month, we're actually going to welcome back Bill Clark a second time, who's going to speak a little bit more broadly about raptor migration worldwide. So if you know of some of Bill Clark's interests and what he's done for the conservation of raptors in the past, he has been quite a conservationist across the globe. So you won't want to miss that. And lastly, with the big numbers today, that actually comes at a cost. And we do want to impress upon you the importance of donating to make programs like this possible. And in addition to that, if you haven't noticed as a HMANA follower, we have reintroduced membership. So if you want to have the feeling of owning a piece of this conservation that we're doing through HMANA, you can actually do that now. So please visit HMANA.org/membership to learn more about that. And for what it's worth, just so you know, just a single membership can pay for a month of providing this program. So it really does pay, and you hopefully can see what your money and investment in HMANA and this conservation type effort, where your money's going and how it's being used. So we thank you for that. If you're interested in becoming a member and joining our kettle, feel free to see HMANA.org/membership. Always feel free to reach out to Julie with any questions. And with that, we thank you for joining. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will see you in a month. Take care.